We built our cities on the promise of movement. We built highways, bridges, and tunnels to connect us. But on the day the sky burned, we learned a terrifying truth. When the engines stop, a city is no longer a home. It is a cage. And we were all trapped inside.
To understand the panic, you have to understand the pulse. Most people think the explosion was the only weapon. They think of the fire, the shock wave, the heat. But before the blast wave shattered the windows, something else hit us. Something invisible. Something silent. I was in the lobby of my building when it happened. I had just run down 14 flights of stairs. I was gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the shattered glass of the lobby doors, I could see the main avenue. It was 2:20 p.m. on a Tuesday. The height of the rush. The street should have been a roaring river of noise, engines revving, horns honking, sirens wailing. But suddenly the noise died. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was instant. It was as if God had pressed the mute button on the mechanical world. In a single heartbeat, 10,000 engines stopped. I saw a city bus, fully loaded, rolling down the incline of the street. Its engine cut out. The power steering failed. The driver wrestled with the massive wheel. Panic etched on his face behind the windshield. The bus drifted silently, heavy and lethargic, until it crunched into the back of a delivery truck. There was no explosion, just the sound of metal bending. Crunch. Then the cars. Sedans, SUVs, luxury sports cars. They all just rolled to a halt. Their digital dashboards went black. Their headlights died. Their radios cut out. The EMP, the electromagnetic pulse. The nuclear detonation high in the atmosphere had sent out a massive burst of electromagnetic energy. It fried every microchip, every circuit board, every electronic ignition system within 50 miles. At first, the people inside the cars didn't understand. I watched a woman in a red convertible just 10 feet away from the glass doors. She turned her key. Nothing. She hit the steering wheel. She checked her phone. Her phone was a black brick. She looked up, and her eyes met mine through the glass. She looked confused. Annoyed. She thought her car had broken down. She didn't know that every car had broken down. Then, the realization started to spread like a wave. Drivers opened their doors. They stepped out onto the asphalt. They looked left. They looked right. Imagine the scene. A 6-lane highway, packed bumper to bumper, completely silent. No engines idling. Just the sound of wind and the distant, confused murmurs of thousands of people stepping out of their vehicles. "Why is everything stopped?" someone shouted. "My phone is dead," yelled another. "Hey, move your car." It was the last moment of civilization. That brief, confused minute where we still thought the rules applied. We still thought traffic would clear. We still thought the police would come and sort it out. But the police cars were dead too. Their lights weren't flashing. Their sirens weren't wailing. The officers were standing by their vehicles, speaking into radios that were nothing more than plastic boxes. I stood there in the lobby, gripping the strap of my backpack. I was an engineer. I knew what an EMP was. I knew what it meant. It meant that the millions of tons of steel sitting on the roads were no longer vehicles. They were obstacles. They were 2-ton paperweights blocking every exit, every bridge, every tunnel. The city hadn't just lost power. It had lost its flow. The veins of the metropolis were clogged. And then the second realization hit the crowd. They looked up. They saw the smoke rising from the impact zone downtown. They saw the purple bruise spreading across the sky. The confusion turned into terror in the blink of an eye. A man in a suit jumped onto the hood of his stalled BMW. He pointed at the sky and screamed. A sound so raw, so full of primal fear, that it made the hair on my arms stand up. "Run!" he shrieked. "We have to run." That was the spark. The powder keg exploded. Thousands of people, stranded on the highway, realized they were sitting targets. They abandoned their cars. They left the doors open. They left their bags, their groceries, their pets. They began to run. But you can't run on a highway blocked by cars. You have to climb. You have to squeeze between bumpers. I watched as the street turned into a human crush. People were scrambling over the hoods of cars. A woman fell and was trampled before she could scream. A father threw his child over a fence to safety, then disappeared under the wave of bodies. I stepped back from the doors. I wanted to help. I wanted to do something. But the engineer in me froze. Physics, I thought. Fluid dynamics. When a liquid is forced through a pipe that is too small, the pressure increases until the pipe bursts. The street was the pipe. The people were the liquid. And the cars were the blockage. The Great Panic had begun. And I was watching it from the front row. The street outside the lobby was no longer a road. It was a battlefield. I needed to get to the subway. It was across the street, maybe 50 yards away. On a normal day, it would take 30 seconds to cross. Today, it looked like an impossible journey across a sea of violence. But I couldn't stay in the lobby. The glass was already cracking from the pressure of the crowd pushing against it. If I stayed, I would be crushed against the back wall. I tightened my backpack straps. I took a deep breath of the lobby air, the last relatively clean air I would breathe for days, and I pushed open the side door. The noise hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the roar of engines anymore. It was the roar of human voices. Screaming, crying, begging. The sound of thousands of feet stamping on pavement and metal. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and was immediately shoved into the side of a stalled taxi. The metal bit into my ribs. Move! Move! A man screamed in my ear, shoving me aside. He was carrying a television. A flat-screen TV. Can you believe that? The world was ending, the sky was burning, and this man was looting a television. He thought he could run home with it. He thought there would be electricity to watch it. He didn't make it 3 steps. The crowd surged, and he went down. The TV shattered under a dozen feet. He didn't get up. I fought my way toward the street. I had to climb over the cars to get across. The sidewalk was too packed. I pulled myself up onto the trunk of a gray sedan. The metal was hot from the sun and the fires burning uptown. From this vantage point, standing on the roof of the car, I could see the true scale of the disaster. It stretched for miles. A river of steel carcasses. To my left, the avenue led toward the bridge, the main escape route from the city. It was a parking lot of the dead. I saw a family trapped in an SUV. The doors were locked. The mob was pressing against the car from all sides, terrified people trying to climb over it. The father was inside, pounding on the glass, screaming at people to get off his car. He was trying to protect his children. But the mob didn't care. They were blind with panic. Someone smashed the rear window of the SUV, not to attack them, but just to get a foothold to climb over. Glass rained down on the children in the back seat. The father panicked. I saw him reach into the glove box. He pulled out a handgun. He held it up for the crowd to see. It was a mistake. In a panic, a gun doesn't create order. It creates chaos. Someone in the crowd screamed, "Gun!" The mob surged away from the SUV, crushing people against the concrete median. But others, the desperate ones, they surged toward it. I turned away before the first shot was fired. I didn't want to see it. I focused on my feet. Asterisk, step on the bumper. Step on the hood. Jump to the next car. Asterisk. I was playing a deadly game of hopscotch. I landed on the roof of a delivery van. The metal groaned under my weight. I looked down into the cab of the van through the windshield. The driver was still sitting there. He wasn't trying to escape. He was an old man. He had his hands on the wheel. He was just staring ahead, tears streaming down his face. He knew. He knew he couldn't run. He knew his legs wouldn't carry him fast enough. He had accepted his fate. He was going to die in that van. Get out. I yelled at him, banging on the roof. You have to move. He looked up at me. He smiled. A sad, heartbreaking smile. He shook his head and pointed to his legs. I looked closer. A wheelchair was folded up in the passenger seat. He was crippled. His van was his only way of moving. Without the engine, he was a statue. I froze. I wanted to help him. But how? I couldn't carry him. I couldn't push the van. The crowd was pushing me forward, a relentless tide. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I jumped to the next car. That moment haunts me. The image of that old man, sitting calmly in his aluminum coffin, waiting for the end, while the world tore itself apart around him. We think our cars are freedom. We think they give us power. But without the spark, without the explosion in the cylinder, they are just cages. Heavy, locking cages. I reached the middle of the street. The subway entrance was close now. But there was a bottleneck. A bus had jackknifed, blocking the path between a dump truck and the sidewalk. The crowd was trying to squeeze through a gap barely 2 feet wide. It was a meat grinder. People were pushing, shoving, clawing at each other to get through. I saw a woman get her hair caught in the side mirror of the bus. She screamed as the crowd pushed her forward, tearing her scalp. I couldn't go through there. I would be crushed. I had to go over. I looked at the bus. It was tall. Too tall to jump, but the dump truck next to it. It had a ladder on the side. I lunged for the ladder. My fingers gripped the cold, greasy metal rungs. Someone grabbed my ankle. "Take me." A voice screamed. "Help me." I looked down. A young man, his face covered in soot, was clutching my leg. He was terrified. "Let go." I kicked out. It was instinct. It was survival. I kicked him in the face. He let go, falling back into the crushing mass of bodies below. I climbed. I scrambled up the side of the truck and onto the top of the bus. I stood up, panting, high above the madness. For a second I was safe. I looked down at the sea of heads, the flailing arms, the violence. And then I saw the sky. The black rain was starting. The first heavy, dark drops were hitting the yellow roof of the bus. Asterisk plat. 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 Asterisk. The chaos below was about to get worse. The people didn't know about the rain yet. They were fighting for space. Soon they would be fighting for their skin. I ran across the roof of the bus and jumped toward the awning of the subway entrance. I had escaped the street. But I knew deep down that the real nightmare was just beginning. The cars had stopped. The city had stopped. And now the dying would start. I stood on the awning of the subway entrance, balancing precariously on the thin metal sheet. From this height, just 10 feet above the street, I had a view that will be etched into my retinas until the day I die. I looked north, toward the bridge. The bridge was the city's artery. It was a massive suspension structure of steel and cable, designed to carry 200,000 cars a day. It was our connection to the mainland, to the suburbs, to safety. Now it was a funnel of death. The EMP had struck when the bridge was at full capacity. 4 lanes outbound, 4 lanes inbound. Hundreds of cars had lost power simultaneously while moving at 50 miles per hour. The result wasn't just a traffic jam. It was a collision of kinetic energy on a massive scale. Cars had piled into each other, fusing into twisted sculptures of metal. I could see smoke rising from the center of the span where a fuel tanker had jackknifed and crushed a row of sedans. The tanker hadn't exploded, the fuel needs a spark, and the electronics were dead, but the impact had ruptured the tank. Diesel was slicking the roadway. But the cars were the least of the problem. The people. Thousands of people from the downtown district had the same idea. Get to the bridge. Walk across. Get out. They surged onto the bridge deck, a tidal wave of flesh pushing into a bottleneck clogged with sharp, twisted metal. I watched through the haze of smoke. It looked like a colony of ants attacking a dead beetle. The crowd was so dense that individual movement was impossible. You moved when the crowd moved. You stopped when the crowd stopped. And then the panic set in. The people at the back, the ones still on the on-ramp, didn't know what was happening at the front. They were terrified of the fire behind them in the city. So they pushed. They pushed with the strength of desperate animals. Forward. Go forward. The chant rose up, a roar that drowned out the wind. But the people at the front had nowhere to go. They were pressed against the crushed cars. They were pressed against the concrete barriers. And they were pressed against the railings. I saw it happen in slow motion. A section of the crowd near the South Tower was squeezed against the pedestrian railing. The pressure must have been immense. Thousands of pounds of force. The railing held for a moment. Then, with a sound I couldn't hear but could feel in my teeth, it gave way. Dozens of people spilled over the edge. They fell into the gray water of the river 200 feet below. They looked like dolls. Flailing, silent dolls dropped by a careless child. I watched them hit the water. Tiny splashes from this distance. They didn't come back up. The current was too strong, or the fall had killed them instantly. And the terrifying thing? The crowd didn't stop. They couldn't stop. The people behind kept pushing, unaware that they were shoving the people in front into the abyss. It was a machine made of human bodies consuming itself. I turned away. I vomited dryly onto the roof of the bus. I realized then that there was no escape. The bridge wasn't a way out. It was a trap. The highways were traps. The tunnels, dark and unventilated, would be tombs by now. The infrastructure that made the city possible, the roads, the bridges, the tunnels, had turned against us. We had built a cage of concrete and steel, and when the power died, the lock clicked shut. I looked down at the street below me. The violence was spreading. It wasn't just panic anymore. It was anger. A man was smashing the window of a luxury car with a tire iron. He wasn't trying to get through. He was screaming, striking the leather seats, destroying the dashboard. He was venting his rage at the machine that had failed him. He was screaming at the god of technology, and the god was dead. I knew I couldn't stay on the awning. The crowd was getting denser. Soon they would climb up here too. I had to go underground. It was counterintuitive. It went against every survival instinct that said, go high, go to the light. But the surface was a meat grinder. I looked at the subway entrance again. Dark, foreboding, but empty of the crushing mob. I made my choice. I would trade the chaos of the light for the terror of the dark. Getting from the awning to the stairs was the hardest 10 feet of my life. I dropped down from the metal roof. I landed on the hood of a stalled taxi. The metal dented under my boots. Immediately, a hand grabbed my ankle. I looked down. It was a woman in a business suit. Her face was streaked with mascara and blood. She wasn't attacking me. She was anchoring herself. "Help me," she sobbed. "My leg. It stuck." I looked. Her leg was pinned between the bumper of the taxi and a delivery bike. The crowd was surging around her, pushing the vehicles tighter together. She was being slowly crushed. I crouched down. I grabbed her arm. "Push." I yelled. "Push against the car." I pulled. She screamed. The bones in her leg ground against the metal. I pulled harder. I put all my weight into it. "Let go of her." A voice roared. A large man, his shirt torn open, slammed into me. He wasn't trying to help her. He was trying to climb over the taxi. To him, we were just obstacles. He shoved me backward. I slipped on the hood. My grip on the woman's hand broke. She screamed as the crowd surged again, and the taxi shifted another inch. She disappeared into the gap between the vehicles. I lunged for the man who pushed me. I wanted to kill him. In that moment, civilization vanished from my mind. I was a caveman. I wanted to bash his skull in with my flashlight. I swung the light. It connected with his shoulder. He grunted and turned on me, his eyes wide and wild. He pulled a knife. A small pocket knife, but in the chaos it looked like a sword. "Back off," he spat. "I'm getting out of here." He slashed at the air. I scrambled back, sliding off the hood of the taxi onto the sidewalk. I looked around. This scene was repeating everywhere. I saw a group of teenagers breaking into a convenience store on the corner. They weren't stealing money. The cash registers were open and ignored. They were fighting over water bottles. One boy had a case of water. Another boy smashed a glass bottle over his head to take it. Water. 10 minutes ago, we were citizens of a first-world country. We worried about emails and deadlines. Now, we were killing each other for 16 ounces of purified water. The veneer of civilization is very thin. We think it is a thick concrete wall, but it's not. It's a sheet of paper. And the EMP had set a match to it. I saw a police officer. He was standing near his cruiser. He wasn't directing traffic. He wasn't helping the injured. He was taking off his uniform. He had unbuttoned his blue shirt and thrown it into the gutter. He was wearing a white undershirt. He took off his badge and dropped it in his pocket. He caught my eye. "It's over," he mouthed. "You're on your own." He turned and ran into the crowd, blending in. He knew. He knew that the badge made him a target. He knew that authority was a myth that only existed when the lights were on. When the power goes out, there is no law. There is only physics. The strong push the weak. The fast trample the slow. I backed away toward the subway stairs. My heart was cold. I had seen the bridge. I had seen the street. I had seen the face of my neighbor, and it was the face of a wolf. The city wasn't dying. It was being murdered by its own inhabitants. I took one last look at the sky. The smoke was thicker now, blotting out the sun. The black rain was falling harder, hissing on the hot hoods of the dead cars. I turned my back on the light. I stepped into the shadows of the subway entrance. I didn't know what was waiting for me down there. I didn't know about the radiation, or the bodies on the platform, or the darkness that would last for days. I just knew I had to get off the street. I took the first step down. The sound of the screaming mob began to fade, replaced by the echo of my own footsteps. I was leaving the great panic behind, and entering the long silence. I descended 10 steps into the subway entrance. Then I stopped and looked back up at the rectangle of gray light framing the street. From down here, the chaos above looked like a movie screen. I could see the legs of people running past. I could see the tires of the stalled cars. I could hear the screaming, but the subway walls muffled it, turning it into a dull, distant roar. It sounded like the ocean, an ocean of anger. I looked at the cars one last time. The BMWs, the Fords, the Toyotas. Millions of dollars of engineering. GPS systems, heated seats, safety sensors, self-driving capabilities. Now they were just metal boxes. We had built our entire civilization on the assumption that the spark would always fire, that the battery would always be charged, that the screen would always light up. We were arrogant. We thought we had conquered nature. We thought we had conquered distance. But nature just blinked. One pulse from the sky, and we were thrown back to the Stone Age. Actually, it was worse than the Stone Age. A caveman knows how to walk. A caveman knows how to hunt. We only knew how to drive. And without our chariots, we were helpless infants. I saw a man sitting on the curb near the entrance. He wasn't running. He wasn't fighting. He was just weeping, holding his car keys in his hand. He was staring at the keys as if they were a magic wand that had lost its spell. He didn't understand. The key didn't matter anymore. The lock didn't matter. The ownership papers in the glove box didn't matter. In that moment, standing between the burning world above and the dark world below, I felt a shift in my soul. The Great Panic wasn't just about fear. It was about grief. We were mourning the death of our way of life. We were mourning the ease, the comfort, the speed. The machine age was over. The age of survival had begun. I turned away from the light. I turned away from the man with the keys. I couldn't save him. He was still waiting for the tow truck. He was still waiting for the police. He was waiting for a world that had ceased to exist at 2:15 p.m. I gripped my flashlight. I adjusted the weight of my backpack. I took a deep breath of the stale, cool air rising from the tunnel. "Goodbye," I whispered. I wasn't saying goodbye to the city. I was saying goodbye to the man I used to be. The man with a job title. The man with a credit score. That man died on the highway. The man walking down these stairs was something else. Something harder. Something colder. I took the next step down. And the next. The gray light of the afternoon faded behind me. The darkness wrapped around me like a blanket. Above me, the car sat silent, rusting in the black rain. Below me, the future waited in the dark. And I walked to meet it.